Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Uh, my name is Danny Bao. I'm Stern class of 2001. I'm also one of the leaders for the local club, and I'm also a member of the planning committee for this Pan-Asia Conference. So very welcome for everyone to come here. So I hope enjoyed the hearing from our distinguished speaker this morning and had a chance to meet and network with your fellow NYU alumni during lunch. I know you are going to find this afternoon's speakers just as compelling. To begin, I would like to introduce Dr. Jonathan Watto. He's a director of McKinsey & Company in Shanghai, who will be speaking about the 4 global force breaking all trends. So let's give a very welcome to Jonathan.
T-minus 15 minutes. Mark, T-minus 15 minutes and counting.
So, no ordinary disruption. Thank you very much for having me here. I'm always glad to have this conversation. And I hope that the next 20 minutes will give you a perspective on how uncertain are the assumptions that we base our everyday business decisions on. I was asked, why did we title this book No Ordinary Disruption? And the answer is, we didn't, or why do I title this talk Disruption? It's actually the outcome, and the outcome of a 25 years of research. This is the 25th anniversary of the McKinsey Global Institute, of which I'm one of the 3 directors, and the McKinsey Global Institute is our internal think tank. It does the thinking about demographics, about urbanization, capital, and we were asked, could we step back and synthesize all of that and put it together and say, what's our view based on those long-term trends? And this is the outcome. And why do we call it disruption? Is because we're all familiar with disruptions in our everyday lives. And when something happens here, then we go over there and we we respond based on a set of assumptions and belief about how the world works. Our contention is that these trends are so fundamental that they cause us to question those assumptions. And so that the very idea of what a market is, or what a job is, or what a competitor is going to evolve. And as such, if we choose to believe that a market is the way it always has been, or that a job, in fact, is a job, in fact, that we will have any jobs, or the thing that we call a job will, in fact, still be there, we are likely to make the wrong decision. Hence, no ordinary disruption. So, warning. Most people know who said this, right? There is a market for only 5 computers, right? You can just shout it out. It's an old trope, and that's of course Tom Watson. So I mean, this predictions are always really difficult, especially about the future. That would be Yogi Berra. And here's another one. So who, for example, said this? The cell phone penetration in the United States by 2000 will be 900,000 subscribers, off by a couple of digits there. Anybody want to guess who said that? Who made that prediction? If Donald had been thinking about those things, perhaps. He was a little busier in the backseat of the limo. But no, of course, that was McKinsey & Company. So, okay. So yeah, we can get this wrong too. So this is not really that kind of a presentation where I'm going to tell you what the oil price is going to be in the year 2019 or so. We do believe that there is some cause to question the way we believe that the world works today, right now. And that, in fact, is in the words of William Gibson, one of my favorite quotes, the future is already here. It's all around us. You just have to, it's just a little patchy. You have to go look for it. And so we actually see this landscape that we live in, this economic landscape and social one, evolving very quickly. So first of all, why do we contend that we shouldn't take stuff for granted? Sometimes we're accused of being a little short-term. So okay, here's 2,000 years of economic history. As you can see, back in the day, for most of recorded human history, the human race was basically smart enough to feed itself. That was about it. The world economy grew at 0.3%. Lots of drama, plague, war, famine, crusades, but still not much progress. And then all of a sudden, hereabouts in 1700, we go from the 0.5 up to the 1 to 2%. We roll along that for a couple hundred years. We call that industrialization and urbanization. And so that was a big jump. And of course, we started to not only get smart enough to grow our wealth, but we also got smart enough to grow our population. And so we started having bigger families, and the world population starts to grow. And finally, 1950, the world just goes crazy. And for the last 50 or 60 years, we've been in a world where we figure that 3-4% growth is pretty normal. And of course, this is very, very abnormal. This has never happened before in the history of the human species. And yet everybody sitting in this room has grown up thinking this is normal and has more or less told their kids that they're going to get this. And their employees, if they're running a defined benefit program, that they can afford this. Should we really count on this? Maybe, given that most of recorded history looks different, and if this does continue at this rate of growth, this 3 or 4% growth, what's that going to do? Well, we can already tell you that that kind of growth does have some pretty unusual impacts, and this is one of them which you really need to update this chart. But we're in negative interest rate territory where you sell negative interest rate investment grade products. We will pay you to take the money. So everything is getting so much cheaper. Have we reached some type of limit in terms of are we in a society of abundance as well? So that's kind of weird. Do we continue down that path, or is something going to break? Here's another thing that's pretty unusual. The lifespan of the average company is down by 80%. So if you're an S&P company now, your average life is about 11 years. Leads you to the interesting question: do we need companies anymore? What is a company? Maybe we should stop thinking about companies. We go back to what was actually a much more traditional form of organization, which was projects and self-associating guilds and people who got together to do things and then split up. So the whole, I think there's some fundamental changes going on that we have to question. Another one would be work. As we just put out a survey showing that 30% of OECD work is done by independent work now. Which is a vast turnaround in the last 15 or 20 years, some of which is online, but a lot of which is just simply independent work. So big changes afoot. We think that the 3 or 4% growth rate is possible, but the world's going to look really different. And there are 4 reasons for that, and I'll go through them reasonably briskly. Urbanization, aging, technology, and globalization. And so each one of them is not a new trend. If they were new trends, we'd actually question them. But these are long-running trends, but the trends are now accelerating and they're concatenating. They are intensifying and they're becoming more connected and they're becoming more contagious. So urbanization. Okay, well, again, this is kind of my story. I live in China. I've been there for 30 years. We have, over half the world's population is urban. That's not the exciting part. It's the 65 million more people every year that are becoming urban. And urbanization certainly has an economic effect, but it's actually a social phenomenon. It's something that changes us at a DNA level, and you can measure this. People who move to cities think differently. Different parts of their brains light up. They walk faster, they talk faster. That's why sidewalks are so chaotic in emerging cities, because you have people from the village and people from the city, and they walk at different speeds. And even if a city person goes back to the countryside, they're now a city person in the countryside. And they again behave differently from their other countryside people. So things are going on, and this does have an economic impact. And of course, here's the basic relationship between urbanization and economic development. And the simple story is you can't get rich unless you're urban. Every rich country is urban. There are no rich countries which aren't urban. Urban is a necessity. It's just a basic feature of the modern economy. Because what is urbanization? Urbanization is specialization. It's the production of high density, high frequency interactions. Jam a lot of people in a room together just like this, they start interacting. Pretty soon you figure out what they're good at and what they're not good at. Hopefully they continue to do the good things. They stop doing the bad things. That's called specialization. Now, you can be urban without getting rich, and there are examples of that. Usually those are products of war and famine and sort of unhappiness. So it is possible to mess this up. But it is, on the other hand, urbanization is the only pathway that we have found to economic development. How big a deal is this? Well, we think it says 3,000 times bigger than the UK Industrial Revolution. This means that the way we think about this is that over the course of UK urbanization back in the 1800s, it took about 150 years to double income. So that's the doubling of income happened by moving people from the farm to the factory. Now, that was about 10 million people, give or take. So Germany and the US, they started a bit later. And so when they moved from farm to factory, they moved to a slightly nicer factory. As a result, their incomes were higher. So they traveled a greater economic distance in the same period of time. So it only took them about 50 or 60 years to double their income. See where I'm going with this. So, Japan and South Korea, 30 started later, again, 30 years for Japan, 10 years for South Korea. And now we have China. So 12 years to double income for China, 16 years for India. So it's essentially an order of magnitude on the time, and then we're not talking about 10 million people, we're talking about 1 billion in China, 1 billion in India, 1 billion in the Middle East, so again, a couple of 300 times there, and that's how you get to the 3,000 times the economic impact of the UK Industrial Revolution. So that's an asteroid hitting the planet, basically, in terms of the number of consumers, the intensity of competition, and the potential impact on resources. I say potential because we can see it coming, and so maybe we should course adjust. Maybe we should figure out how to become more efficient in using our resources, and in fact, that is happening. So it's a very dynamic system. Just because the potential is there doesn't mean it will be realized, particularly for the negative stuff. But the positive stuff is great. So, here, 4 billion, what this means on the consumer side is, 4 billion new consumers. So anybody who is interested in, consumers and markets, sort of have to rethink what they mean by a market. That all those new consumers are basically here. Within a, like 1,000-kilometer radius of basically right here, you'll find most of those consumers. So that's the exciting part. This is the opportunity that will reshape the consumer markets and the businesses forever, because there won't be another urbanization. It happens once. Just to give an example, 440 emerging market cities will be about half of global growth. Another way of saying this is Tianjin versus Stockholm. Today, they're roughly the same size of a city. 10 years from now, Stockholm will still be a nice city. Tianjin will be the size of Sweden. So it's, that is the opportunity here again. You should be focusing on those 440 cities, most of which are medium-sized cities. They're kind of in the range of between 500,000 to 2 million. And there are places where many people haven't heard of, let alone gone there. And that's the opportunity, because you can go there and you can be first in and you can shape the terms of competition. Reality, though, you're not going to do that. The people who are going to do that are the people who are already there right now. So if we look at the companies that are over $1 billion, back in 2010, you had 8,000 companies that had over $1 billion worth of revenue. By 2025, you had 15,000 of them, over $1 billion. 70% of those are from emerging markets. So basically, the guys who are going to take this are going to be companies that are coming out of China and India and Africa and the Middle East, for that matter, and they're going to be the new global consumer companies and industrial infrastructure companies, for that matter. So Hong Kong's always been good at partnering. So let's see how this works out. So that's the first one. Okay, everybody know this building? Yes, it's a China Museum up in Shanghai, was the China Pavilion during the Shanghai Expo. But no, this is actually the Chinese demographic pyramid in the year 2040. As you can see, is demonstrated by this. There's 1 child, 2 parents, 4 grandparents. So yeah, that's the second big force. The world is really changing. We're aging really fast. And net for everybody in this room, that's a good thing. So when let me go back to that. 1 out of 4 people will be over the age of 65 by the year 2040. So everybody here is going to have lots of friends. It's a good thing. And on the other hand, not so many kids, so I have a lot of free time. In fact, we think that 93% of the increase in leisure going for the next 15 years is going to come from is going to go to people who are over the age of 65. 93%. There's a lot of free time there because there's not that many kids. There's just fertility rates are dropping globally, and there is a small evidence that if you get above like $30,000–$40,000 of income, if you look at some of the Nordics, then it goes back up again. But otherwise, no. We kind of know where we're going on the fertility side, and as I said, as the longer lifespans are good things. I mean, so we'll all live longer. Now we have to figure out what does that mean. There's an economic implication to this, which is that for the last 50 years, half our growth came out of people getting into the workforce, and sort of the workforce being defined as between the ages of 15 and 55, I think. Well, okay, so that was half and half roughly between employment and productivity. Going forward, all that half that came out of the employment side going basically to zero. And so the math is pretty simple. If you want to keep delivering that 3 or 4% growth, you're going to have to essentially double the productivity, 2x productivity. That's the only way, because otherwise people are not going to be working, or they're not going to be in that thing that we call a job that you had full-time employment between the ages of 15 and 55. So I think there are two takeaways from this. One is that the definition of employment is going to change, and the second thing is that either we figure out how to become more productive, or we're going to have slower growth. As a friend of mine who runs the UK pension plan used to say, you have 3 choices. You can either work harder, save more, or reset your expectations. Nobody likes to reset their expectations. It has political consequences. So, I think this, the good news so on this is that, yeah, can you do this? The answer is yes, you can. You absolutely can. There's actually no technical constraint here. There's more than enough opportunities to double productivity. Go to your average Chinese department store and look around you. You can see them, or a bank, or to a travel agency. And a lot of this is just catch up. But there's about a quarter of the opportunity is probably bleeding edge stuff, things that are new, frontiers. But about 3/4 of it is simply automating the factory or doing a better job of trucking. But with all of that change, of course, you get dislocation. So to give an example, the Chinese manufacturing sector has about 100 million employees. It's had 100 million employees for the last couple of decades. It has 40% job turnover, flat 100 million. That means every year 20% of jobs are created, 20% of jobs are destroyed every year. And the comparable number for the United States is 15%. So 40 versus 15, the Chinese manufacturing sector is 2.5 times more dynamic. The metabolic rate of the sector is 2.5 times that of the United States. That's what it means. So 2.5 times the number of bankruptcies, the number of job changes, the number of job development, new venture creation, all of that. So that creates real social change, and it looks different. So can we do it? Yes. Don't have to be Ray Kurzweil, though this is Ray Kurzweil's chart, to believe in the fact that things are speeding up, that we can, everything is, the process of discovery is becoming that much easier. Favorite examples, took 500 years to go from the printing press to the laser printer, took another 50 years to go from the laser printer to the 3D printer, 40 years maybe, and then another 20 years to go from the 3D printer to the biogenomic sequencer, which can buy for a couple $100,000 and sequence your DNA at home for $2,000. So everything is getting that much faster. So on the supply side, if you will, things are developing much quicker. And on the demand side, it took 38 years for 50 million people to start listening to radio. It took 13 years for them to start watching TV. It took 3 years for the internet, 9 months for Twitter, 15 days for Pokemon Go. So yeah, 50 million is no big deal. We can get there. And by the way, you can lose 1 million viewers that fast as well. So what goes up can and will come down. So there is this potential to accelerate the transition, and this has an implication, of course, because if we have kids and we told them that you might wind up working as a lawyer, doctor, dentist, what have you, work in an office like this, that office is now going to look like this, because anything that can be automated and standardized will be digitized and will disappear. We think that 40% of all activities of every job can be automated, 40%. And now there's some that are going to just disappear. There are not so many horse and buggy drivers around today, but it's going to be everybody's job. Everybody's job is going to change because everybody's job has a whole lot of routine components that can actually disappear. So what's going to be left is interactive skills, judgment skills, creative skills. These are things that will ultimately, we find, to be less capable of being substituted by technology. But that means everybody's job will change. Here's some opportunities. I mentioned this already, actually. This is your home DNA sequencer. You can buy this now. It replaces the Human Genome Project, which that we spent an amount of money equivalent to the Panama Canal, and now you get this for $150,000 from NVIDIA. But it's not just the really high-tech stuff, which is kind of cool. This is, everybody know, yeah, this is a 3D printed house. So we can print out our affordable housing, cost you about $5,000 to do that. And this was an very old chart. I should really update it. But so this is not just about the future in some sort of lab somewhere. This is about everyday stuff. And as soon as you can walk around, I was in an Uber in LA, and all of a sudden the NPR comes on and talks about the Pittsburgh and autonomous vehicles being introduced by Uber, and the guy turns around and looks at me and says, "Have you been to Pittsburgh?" I said, not really. And then the segment goes on to say, not too many companies are, quite so direct about saying that they want to substitute out their workforce. But when Uber was asked, will they still have human drivers, the response from the spokesperson is, we'll still need them for the difficult routes. So yeah, hang on. It's going to be a bumpy ride. Can this go global? I mean, isn't there somewhere to hide? Can't I just close my eyes and the world will go away somehow? No. 1990, $2 trillion worth of global trade. 2013, $18 trillion worth of global trade. So, things are up and down. Right now, the last couple of years, things have been a bit flat. But, this is a one-way street, first of all. We don't see it ever declining. And as we look at where it's happening, of course, it's right here. The big growth has all been intra-Asia trade. And so that's a good thing for anybody who's in the flow. We know that countries and regions that are better connected, that are hubs, they grow up to 25 to 30% faster than the regions that are not. And so that's, of course, explains Hong Kong, Singapore, Dubai, and it also kind of explains Qatar and Bahrain, sort of why they're not growing and they're not as connected. So, so trade does tend to bring those technologies everywhere, and not just any kind of trade, but here's the amazing thing. 45 times the growth between the 2005 and 2014 in data traffic. 45 times. There's $3 trillion worth of data traffic has been growing in the last decade. So even as goods and services trades have stalled out a bit, particularly in the last 2 or 3 years, data is going great guns. And that means that we're having a hard time measuring this. So like if you're a doctor or a radiologist in Orange County, you're going to have half your clientele in China. As you're just basically doing diagnostic over the wire, and you maybe fly over once a year and you see patients, but otherwise you're quite happy. If you're an architect, half the architects in Chicago are basically working in China while living in Chicago, and they're designing great. Look at Gensler. Look how Gensler works, or any of these guys. It is a global service trade, and that is the opportunity for growth, but it's also the opportunity for dislocation. So when I was in Australia, everybody was, last year, everybody was complaining about how the value of the pension plans were all disappearing because the taxi medallions had all been disintermediated by Uber. So a piece of software from Silicon Valley had made taxi medallions that much less, which had affected the pension retirement scheme savings of middle-class white Australians, and they were very upset about this. So it's not entirely clear that this is going to go smoothly. One has to ultimately ask the question, the people who are bringing all this dislocation on this, the people who are, capturing the value or creating all this value, but they're also creating all this dislocation, shouldn't they be paying something for that? Isn't there a cost to all of this? Who's going to ultimately wind up the cost of those? The drop in, I think it's middle-class white American male labor force participation has gone from 95% down to 83% over the last decade. Those are a lot of people sitting in front of TV doing nothing. How to think about reskilling those folks, and who should actually be paying for that? Maybe the 15 Snapchat billionaires have something to offer. And it's not an equal world. So we have, this is the per capita GDP versus the the interconnect. And so, we can see that, China is actually kind of like way out there, but of course there is the firewall issue. But there are some places that are right at the top, and so as economic development goes up, the interconnect goes up, but there's quite a lot that isn't, and there are some that just are kind of off the curve. And so this is kind of interesting problem here for European countries, and some of them finding it difficult to keep up, if you will. So that, it's very, very competitive. So with that, the last point on interconnect is that it took us 50 years to have post-World War II. We had ups and downs. We didn't have a global recession until we had a global recession. And so all of that interconnect means that not only the good stuff gets shared, but also the bad. And so the shocks ripple around the world that much faster. I think everybody knows that Greece has been in default for half of its known existence as a country. Nobody particularly cared until recently, when somebody thought it might affect Germany and France and somebody else. So all of a sudden we have a euro crisis. So well, that's new. So this historically had not been the problem. So now it is. Now we have to build that resilience, that volatility, awareness into everyday life. And it should be part of our own thinking about ourselves as much as about our companies and our institutions. So what to do? We have, you're sort of waiting for me to pull out the answer and saying, what's the McKinsey recommendation? Again, I sort of started by saying I didn't have that, but what I can say is we do see three habits, three ways of thinking about the world that tend to be better, lead to better outcomes. And they are, in a nutshell, curiosity, agility, and optimism. Curiosity, because obviously if you don't know what's going on, it's very hard to react to it. And sometimes, most organizations do have people in them who are curious, who see the world a different way, who think that markets are over here instead of being over there. Organizations are usually pretty good at finding those people and firing them. Because they get in the way. This is the grit in the oyster that you try to expel. And so how can you get anything done if this person is telling you that mobility is not going to be about a bigger engine? It's going to be about electronics and sensors and guidance systems. And you say, well, I'm a metal guy. I don't like that. So hence GM versus the follower if that. So I think they got the message now, but it took them a good decade or two. So being curious about what's possible is a first step. But if you're curious but you can't do anything, that's incredibly frustrating. That's the agility problem. That's kind of the issue I always see when I walk around OECD countries and companies, is they say, well, I've got legacy cost structures, I'm stuck, I can't do anything, I already built the factory, woe is me. Well, okay, then you've kind of already decided what's going to happen for you. That's why we say that the Indian space program is the world's most agile space program, because it's $80 million was their launch of the Mangalaswar, and first-time success to get a Mars launch. Success, so first-time success is always really good. $80 million. Is $80 million a big number? In the space business, not so much. By comparison, Gravity, the movie Gravity cost $80 million. So you can go make a movie, or you can go to Mars. It's kind of your call. And so when asked, how did you manage to do this for 80 million bucks? The Indian space program guy said, well, every country's space program has their objectives. The American one is all about technology and sort of being the best in the technology and using the space program to develop new technology. The Russian one was all about payload and robustness. They liked big rockets, and so they spent a lot, and they weren't really counting the money. Our focus was on making the budget. We had $80 million. We were not getting any more. So we had to work backwards from that and say, what were going to be the bottlenecks in the process, and how would we make the best use of the scarce resources and borrow technology from wherever we could and sort of do partnerships and so forth, stuff that other programs just didn't do. And so agility is also a mindset, saying, this is what I have to do. And it's not about what I did before. That's why I like China. China is the least romantic place in the world. Nobody cares about what happened before. It's all about what's happening now and what will happen in the next 24 hours. That's what matters. So China is the world's most agile economy from my perspective. Which leads you to optimism. Because, we're as business people, we're all optimists, right? We have to be. It's kind of part of the job. Winston Churchill, I am an optimist. There doesn't seem to be much point to being anything else. But on the other hand, the reason we're optimists is because we're going to fail a lot, continuously, over and over again, hopefully in different ways. I had to give a talk on resilience at my son's school the other day, and I was asked this question: what is the role of failure in resilience? That was an interesting question. I said, well, I've always been, I've had plenty of progress reviews where people said you're too focused on success. And so I returned to this, so precisely which part of this project would you like me to fail on? So I'll be happy to do that. So the idea isn't you don't set out to fail, you set out to succeed, but you do take risk, and you take risks in the interest of learning. And the reason you keep trying and you keep failing is because one day you are an optimist that you'll succeed. And for companies, that's incredibly hard to do. It's incredibly hard to say, I'm going to guarantee you that 5% of my discretionary capital expenditure is going to be worthless. Guaranteed. I'm going to take that piece of money and I allocate it corporate to the stuff, and I can tell you right now it's going to be worthless. You see what happens to your stock price. That's this idea that you can and should reallocate capital across businesses, from businesses that have historically been successful to ones that have no clue about what they're doing. And they're going to take money from Joe and give it to Helen, even though Helen has no track record and Joe's been producing consistent earnings for the last decade. That's a really hard conversation. It's a hard conversation internally, let alone with your share price analysts. But it's the one you have to have, because if you're not that kind of an optimist, you're not going to be around very long. And that's why 80% of the lifespan of companies is down by 80%, because markets are a whole lot more efficient than companies are in finding and developing optimists. So I leave you with that. Be curious, be agile, be optimistic, because this is no ordinary disruption. Thank you very much. By the book.
Do we have any questions from the floor?
Questions, comments, reactions?
Anyone?
Right here. Yep, Brian. Right. Yeah.
Thanks so much, Jonathan. So fantastic talk, fantastic lead up to what we're going to be doing shortly. AI. So the big thing that's coming, we talk about how automation can change various things. AI has potentiality to change a lot of what we do, even on the higher end levels. So to what extent are you worried about AI perhaps one day replacing consultants?
Sure. There are two kinds of AI, and I'm cribbing this from Mitch Kapoor. And he said that, there's the AI that makes us faster, better, stronger, do different things, do things better, higher quality. And then there's the AI, which is bow down to your robot overlords, the robot overlords, Deus ex machina, not so much. The higher, better, faster, yeah, absolutely, all the time. And that's, again, probably a good thing. It's, on the other hand, it challenges us all to be that much more resilient and responsive. So I was once told by a manufacturing client that the definition of a commodity was something that could be technically differentiated. And so his idea essentially was that if you can spec it out, so you can measure that, and that's a differentiated product, and I can charge you a premium for that. And I looked at myself and said, am I technically differentiated? And I couldn't say that. So I said, well, I have to question your definition of a commodity then. So I mean, that a commodity is ultimately something that you say doesn't have value for people, or it values interchangeable. I don't believe that. I think that's where creativity and innovation come in. So I think AI is taking things that are interchangeable, and it's reducing the cost of that, and it's allowing us to rethink where we should be spending our time. And I think we all have that experience in our daily lives. So, yeah, net of that, I think it raises the bar. I think it does make us that much more challenged to figure out what is new. But on the other hand, I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that's a good thing. So,
Jamie?
Again, awesome lead up to our panel. I'm surprised that you didn't touch on blockchain. Some people say that it's like internet in 1994, and some people even predict that the disruption is going to create in the next 20 years is going to be 5 to 10x bigger than the internet, because it directly involves the store and exchange of value. What's your take on blockchain?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it sort of highlights an important area for my own personal growth, is to better understand financial to fintech. And so I'm gonna punt. I'm gonna tell you that, yeah, I mean, the global financial system was set up in an era where most communications was done by ship. And so, we have institutions that clearly are not able to intermediate capital for certainly the new set of enterprise and entrepreneurs, but even that for the way most people live their daily lives right now. And so you walk around, and I think the notion of having cash is going to become quite quaint in the in the not too distant future. So I can imagine. I mean, but to answer your question, yeah, I can only say that this is going to require a reskilling again of that whole sector, and along with that, a capacity to innovate for the sectors that use that financial technology that will accelerate their innovation. So, but it's a good question. MGI should research that. We'll make sure that we do.
Next question, please.
Yep,
Alan.
right back there. There's a hand up. Yep.
Hi, thank you. So when you touched upon, sorry, my name is Michael. I graduated CAS 2014, and I'm coming in from China, Chengdu. And when you spoke about employment and the change that's about to come to employment, I wanted to get your thoughts on how do you see the physical network changing and the physical space changing to fulfill the new type of employment. When you say independent work, we know in the US there's 35% of the labor force are now freelancers or independent workers. How do you see that changing the workplace, especially when I'm doing something related to workspace? So I wanted to get your take on that. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, it's so fast moving, but I mean, of course, you have the WeWork of the world and collective spaces, and I think there's going to be a much more of attention to what enables people to collaborate effectively while preserving some level of solitude. We know that people in cities, they need solitude. If they're constantly surrounded by stress, they makes them less happy. But at the same time, they thrive on social interactions. So we want both. And so designing the space so that it engages, but it allows for retreat at the same time. So the concept of permeability, where you have pieces of a square which are protected and pieces of the square which are open. I do a lot of urban design work, so I can sort of analogize from that. But what we want to avoid is what Arthur Koestler would refer to as buildings that make you feel like termites. Because they have these huge facades and you're sort of smack up against them, and then there's no way of actually interacting with people other than in this very open, exposed manner. Those are really bad workspaces and really bad environments for people. So there are some timelessness about what we as social pack animals on the savannah used to find as being things that made us more comfortable, and those are design norms, and we just have to think about how we integrate that in a context where we're going to where we have the technology to choose. The thing is that sometimes we get a technology and we just run with it, and we sort of forget about the externalities until we all wake up in the morning and realize that we're all 30 pounds overweight and that have high blood pressure and have been sitting in our cars for 4 hours a day. So these externalities are things that I think good design can address, and encourage you to continue the research to figure out what in your particular local context would make more sense. So.
Thank you. It's Alan Lee from Business School. How do you see the educational system getting disrupted? Any suggestions for maybe Dean Henry here and all of us?
I wouldn't presume to judge, but I was on a panel about human capital and the supply side reform 2 days ago with Ronnie Chan. So it was a good conversation because this is up in Beijing, and people were sort of thinking about this from the terms of the migrants and also aging workers, and then new graduates who don't have jobs, and then we sort of conclude, but actually everybody has this problem. It's not. We can't say there's one group in society which sort of feels like it has all the jobs that it wants. Everybody wants more, and then we sort of ask this question: what about those jobs? What is this idea of a job? And I already made the statement: there are no net new jobs, none. There's not going to be any net new jobs. That's just another way of saying that the workforce has peaked. But it's true. I mean, any job that we get is going to be because somebody changed the job. Somebody changed from agricultural to service to urban. And then within the category of service from, again, the breakdown of these full-time jobs to independent and contracting relationships, all of which basically says an educational system which is set up where 80% of our expenditures happen between the ages of 15 and 25 is just wrong. It is that if we are, what happened? You know, at the end of 25, did we just die? Did our brain stop? You know, is that no? The human brain is like trees; they keep growing right up until the end, and we learn as much between the ages of 40 and 60 as we do between the ages of 20 and 40. We might learn differently. We might learn more from experience and hands-on and practice. Then the capacity to remember does decline, but it's still learning. And so I think that's so what for a world in which we are all going to have to reskill everybody's job, everybody's skills, all the time. You know, every 10 or 15 years you go through a generation of technology. So there's a so what there. And I think the good news is that people will pay for that. Education is one of the fastest growing sectors of a modern economy. And so this should be a good thing to invest in. I think, frankly, it's very hard to see state sector education keeping up. In most, particularly in emerging markets. So there's huge demand, not enough capacity, and an unwillingness in the sector itself to innovate because they still see, the glass half empty for them. It's like, I want to hang on to the privileges of being the monopoly provider of education. Well, why wouldn't you? That does leave a market, though, unsatisfied. And I feel like government, to its credit, has realized that in China, and let alone everywhere else in the world where government has sort of just thrown up its hands and said, well, anybody can try. A net of this is, I do see there's a, sky's the limit opportunity here, but there's a lot more about how does one engage and how does one rethink the workplace to the point where, last point, education to employer collaboration is clearly, that's a theme that McKinsey's been involved in a lot through the Generation Project, where we have, I think at this point, 70,000 graduates going on right now in schools that we support around the world, and it's all employer-based education, working with schools to ensure that the folks coming in can see the pipeline all the way through to the craft and the skill that they're supposed to achieve, and then are engaged in the workplace from day one, not just at the end of the process.
We probably have time for one more question. Anyone want to take this opportunity? All right. If not, thank you, Dr. Walter, for sharing your insight with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now, I'd like to welcome Dr. Alan Zeman, the chairman of Lan Guifang Group. Doctor, please come on the stage. I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with Lan Guifang Group and their assets, all right, in Hong Kong and also Ocean Park.
I hope so.
I've been to his bar, a few times. Next, let's welcome Jamie Lin. He's a Stern class of 2006 and founding partner of AppWork Venture. Welcome. And our next speaker is Dr. Li Bing. He's a Stern class of 2000 and graduate class School of Arts and Science PhD degree in 1996, and also currently the CIO of ABGLB Healthcare Fund. He's a healthcare investor. Welcome. Obviously, this panel is about innovation, and the moderator will be Brian Tan. Brian Tan is a graduate of law school class of 1997. He's the managing director of Asia Capital Markets. He's also the founder of Yarn Maker and Change Maker. Thank you, Brian. Thank you very much. Thank you. Please take a seat. Thank you.
Wow, following up from Jonathan, there's good and bad in that, right? On the one hand, it really sets a scene for what we're about to talk about, but the bar is kind of high. So our topic for today is innovation in Asia. Now, in the bad old days, innovation, Asia, really? It's cheap manufacturing, it's copycats, right? But today, Asia has really transformed itself over the past few years. So I'm quite involved in the maker movement globally. So in the US, President Obama is pushing for a nation of makers. In China, Li Keqiang is pushing 创客. right? And it was launched right just close to Hong Kong in Shenzhen, where the idea is rather than being typecast as just being made in China, it wants to be innovate with China. And really, through mass innovation, entrepreneurship, creating the new products and designs of tomorrow. In recent years, China has produced the bats, right? I'm sure a lot of people here are familiar with the bats. Baidu, Alibaba, and Tencent. These are really cutting-edge companies doing things that are actually being copied elsewhere in the world now. You've got Mark Zuckerberg looking at Tencent and going, wow, cool product, cool project. You know, let's put some of these things into Facebook, right? You've got Alibaba created Singles Day. Okay, how many of you participated in Singles Day? Right, so Singles Day, November 11th, coming up, generated last year 14 billion in sales in one day. So that's more than the US sales.
14.3 billion
Oh,
in one day.
thank you very much.
I sit on the board.
So you see, we have the right people here. And that's exceeded, Cyber Monday and Black Friday sales combined, right? And so this year, it's been recently announced that for this year's Singles Day, Alibaba's Taobao is going to have VR shopping, and it's also going to have a live streaming fashion show. So as you see the fashion show, I like that. I'm gonna buy it. Alan, you can.
Well, they already did have this fashion show in Shanghai, actually. But yeah, it's Alibaba is just going through a tremendous transformation. Last year, as I said, they did 14.3 billion in sales in 24 hours. Never in the history of the world has any company ever done that. And they had 555 million customers in 24 hours, over 1 billion products, and 60% were from overseas products. And so, and the idea is this year, including Hong Kong and Taiwan as being able to tap into the market. Last year, the funny thing, and most people don't know, they had to slow down the sales late in the afternoon because they realized they would tie up the logistics. All the ports in China would have been tied up for about 3 weeks, and so they had to slow down the sales in order so that they don't kill the whole transportation network in China. But it's quite remarkable what technology is doing at the moment.
And Joseph presented once on that, and I forgot the stat though, but he said how many transactions per second? Something like 70,000 transactions, some ridiculous number.
I mean, the numbers are just, it's too much for the human brain even to count on. But it just, and it's just, and this year, Alibaba's expecting to do more for Singles Day. I'm just going up on the 10th in Shenzhen. There's a big kickoff party in Shenzhen. Katy Perry will be there, and it'll be like New Year's Eve. To the stroke of midnight, there'll be a countdown and a lot of people there, and so they've taken an event, 11/11 Singles Days, that was actually started by students. It was a group of students in a university, actually, I think it was in Nanjing, that had Singles Day. It was a small thing, and then Jack Ma got onto it, and then took it to the next level. But it's just something that goes to show what innovation really can do and how the world is changing. The disruption of every industry is changing in the world at the moment.
Thank you very much, Alan. So again, as was introduced by Danny earlier on, Alan's known as Mr. Lang Kwai Fong. He's also, Forbes, I think, called you the mouse killer because of the fantastic work he's done with Ocean Park, especially in light of international brands coming through. And increasingly, of course, your background is in F&B, in entertainment, in lifestyle, but all of that is changing dramatically. Maybe if you can start off by sharing a bit of your journey there and how technology is evolving that and how you're addressing that.
I actually started in the fashion business before, from the age of 16. I was in the fashion business for 35 years. And actually fashion, just for all of us, the world is about fashion. And when you say fashion, everything changes. Business is about fashion, and it's understanding consumer behavior. And what the world is doing, what technology is doing, actually big data is actually allowing you to understand human customer behavior and allowing you to really perfect your business and see what the consumer really wants. Sounds very boring and technical, but it actually allows you to zero in, and every company in the world is being disrupted, whether you're in finance, whether you're in services, whether you're in legal, you name it. It's something that's really very, very, very important now. The hardest thing is for companies to change. Say in Lan Kwai Fong, even entertainment, what we've just done just during the Halloween that just came up, which was an incredible Halloween. Just pull up something. We basically had we've started something called LKF Labs. You know, where we have a lot of young people just working on innovative technologies. First, we were doing AR gaming. We had something for Halloween. We made a mobile app called Monster Mash, which was really the forerunner for Pokemon Go. We actually did it before we had it planned, before Pokemon Go ever got. And what it was we used GPS location-based technologies, and it encouraged visitors to come to Lan Kwai Fong. And since GPS is not so accurate nor reliable enough in small urban areas where you have tall buildings, we switched to Bluetooth beacons, and it helped to have more precise locations in specific bars and restaurants. And it gave people, you know, Monster Mash also includes some AR technologies in catching monsters that you can capture and taking funny selfies, sending it to friends. It enabled connectivity between customers, and it gave them discounts in bars and restaurants, the ones that caught the most monsters. And the winner at the end of the Halloween promotion won a trip for two from Delta Airlines to the United States. So it enabled us to really look at what new technology is doing and how it's changing. Also, we have the team now developing VR. VR is in the infancy right now, virtual reality, and basically, I believe, will change the world, the way we look at things. Many of you may have seen me. I was I did a promotion for Sony PlayStation. And I looked at.
Seen that one. I've
Well,
seen you dressed
yes,
in lots of
I
different
looked.
things.
I was Voldemort, you know, from Harry Potter, basically. And it's, if you've never done VR, it's just an amazing thing. It screws up your brain, actually, but I can tell you, it's coming. It's the future, and so we're looking at different things. Even with Alibaba, as you said. People are now looking at shopping centers, shopping malls. How can you change, make a virtual mall whereby you will be able to shop in the mall, in the different stores, in the shopping center, and they basically try and close and order clothes. So it's disrupting bricks and mortar. And in the world at the moment, there's a divide between the older generation and the young generation. The older generation, you know, I say this many times, they still read newspapers. And young generation, of course, reads online. And as the older generation dies off, as your parents die off, unfortunately, newspapers will disappear. And the young generation, you know, if you ever mentioned a telex machine to a 3-year-old, a 4-year-old, they wouldn't know what you're talking about. And it wasn't so long ago that telex existed. So the world is changing really, really quickly. You know, we're also looking at different Wi-Fi and video sensors. Again, tracking customer behavior, which is very, very important, and everybody is doing this. You know, in the old days when we used to build shopping, we're building a huge shopping mall and experiential center in Shanghai, 5 million square feet, called Dream Center, in conjunction with China Media Capital, which is Li Ruigang, and Jeffrey Katzenberg from DreamWorks, which was just sold to Comcast. But you know, in the old days, the norm was 70% retail, 30% F&B, and then you built 2 office buildings next to you, and that was it. There was a formula that worked for years. You can go to sleep and just collect rent and have an income. In today's world, because of the disruption, because young people don't shop, they don't go out, they shop online, and especially in China, even more so than the United States. And so what's happened is today the norm is 65% entertainment and F&B, the reverse, and about 35 to 40% is retail. And the retail has to be experiential retail. And it's the only way to get, luckily, young people still can't eat the internet, so they have to go out. And so
They can order in, though.
you could order in, but you get tired of that after a while. And so, so things are changing. We're looking in our business of now keeping up, staying ahead of the curve. My success in business, and I say this many times, I look at things not for what they are, I look at things for what they could be. So when you're looking at things in the future, if you're going to do a business, whether it's technology or traditional business, whatever it is, look at things differently, look at things through different eyes. Then you have a chance at winning and coming out. In the future, video sensors will be everywhere and already are, but more and more, you'll be able to know everything about your life. People will be able to know everything about the consumers. You'll be able to perfect your product to fit that. And that's exactly what we're working on all the time. Everything is becoming so analytical that it is important that, for small companies, that's why companies like Tencent, Alibaba were able to be the disruptors in their industries. Uber, young people are growing up totally different. It's a sharing economy. We invested in Lan Kwai Fong in California Tower. There's a company called Meta that we invested in, which is an incubator startup company. It's about sharing economy, sharing offices, and brainstorming together. It's a whole other world from the traditional business that most industries are with. And Hong Kong itself, if we don't wake up, we will be we're already far behind, but we have to wake up. But I know there's other speakers, so I won't hog the...
No, not at all. Thanks so much. We'll certainly come back to you on some of those fantastic points. But it's a fantastic segue to Jamie.
Yes.
So Jamie is one of Taiwan's best-known VC investors. He's as you had heard, he's an NYU Stern alumni who founded AppWorks Accelerator, the largest of its kind in Asia. So Jamie actually has been in the startup space, and with Accelerator, he's been promoting the startup companies that are addressing some of the technologies tomorrow. Perhaps you should if you can shed some light, Jamie, in relation to the Taiwan scene, and also by extension to that, how technology is changing and evolving, and the interesting spots there.
Okay, sure. First of all, I'm honored to be here. Even though I've just graduated for 10 years, it seems I'm the youngest of the alum here to get to be on the stage. But I hope we're gonna have more young people come on stage soon. So I think what we're observing, like John said, it's actually not a country-specific thing. It's actually a global thing. And I think when people are talking about it, I think we're too focused on the technological innovation, and we're not focused enough on sort of the channel disruption and distribution disruption. So back in the days, if you remember, Walmart used to be one of the most valuable companies in the world, and they were valuable partly because they were one of the best innovators in terms of applying logistics technologies, but also because they were the largest distributor, and they're the first shop consumers go to when they want to buy stuff. And the fact that Walmart displays your merchandise, it influences people. And I think if you were to ask me, I think that's that part of Walmart's value is much bigger than their logistics network. And fast forward today, I think what internet brings is the whole new sort of disruption again of who gets the last mile. So even if you're a good technological innovator, if you don't get consumers hooked on to your network or hooked onto your service, you don't have a lot of value. And the reason why I moved all the way back from New York to Taiwan to start AppWorks is I realized that in today's world, there's this whole new rise of the new internet channels, and it's becoming a new type of colonization. So, for example, Taiwan has 23 million people, 18 million people online. They're all on Facebook. So back in the days before Facebook, when a Taiwanese local business wants to advertise to our local consumers, we go through our local media. But now a lot of the businesses have to go through Facebook. And Facebook, having less than 5 employees in Taiwan, is able to make more than $200 million of revenue a year just by owning the 18 million consumers that open Facebook app every day. And it's a new type of colonization. So if Taiwan doesn't fight back, if we don't try to win some of these last mile wars, or other countries in this region don't fight back and try to win some of these wars, we're gonna be colonized by Western civilizations again. So that's why I moved back to Taiwan to start AppWorks. And the rationale behind it is to help smart local entrepreneurs build internet companies so that we can win back some of these last miles. So fast forward to today, we're still not there yet. All these foreign digital powers are still very strong in Taiwan. Google, Facebook are aligned, but we're getting better. But then on the flip side, Taiwan is actually a very interesting case. So you have all the huge digital economies that like China that Alan talked about. But then Taiwan, if you take a look at its e-commerce industry, is at almost 30 billion a year toward the end of this year, which is going to make it number 9 in the world. So Taiwan being a number 25 economy in the world, because we developed our digital economy much earlier and much faster, we are able to become a top 10 sort of digital market. It's even bigger than India as it is today, but nobody's talking about Taiwan. So it's actually a pretty good market for internet founders, because it's sizable enough to get to a certain scale, and then you take that, you expand across the region. So that's my take of what is happening and what's happening to Taiwan, and I'll be happy to talk more about it later.
Sure. No, thanks so much for that. Maybe we'll take this opportunity to just briefly segue over to Bin. So because when we're talking about innovation, there's so many elements of innovation. You've heard about some of the hardware initiatives. You've heard about some of the software elements as well, and that links to distribution too, as we mentioned by Jamie. But health and healthcare is a huge area of potential innovation as well. So Bin is actually one of the go-to people in global and Asian healthcare. As you had heard, he's a double NYU PhD in biochem and in Stern. So go Stern. We've got good representation up here. He was a top-rated sell-side healthcare analyst at some of the major league banks before going to the buy side, where he's at Ellie Bridge, which is a healthcare private investment platform. And so he covers both private and public. So Bin, in our side discussions, you talked about how, to be honest, the US is still quite far ahead in terms of some of the areas of innovation, and especially in the healthcare area. But Asia is really catching up in different aspects. Could you shed some light in terms of your take on that?
Sure. Also, first, I want to thank you for inviting me to give me the opportunity not only to meet new friends, but also to actually this morning and during lunchtime, I discovered there are many friends I've known for a long time. They're all Stern alumni, and no wonder you're all doing well and well respected in your area, because it all makes sense. You graduate from NYU, so to I think to answer your question, I want to take a step back just to say, when you think about innovation, in medical science, it is not just about making new drugs, making new devices. It is also about innovation in healthcare IT, genomics, precision medicines, as well as the previous speaker mentioned about something like AI. Your question, think about recent news on IBM Watson. Now they're able to help oncologists to collect the massive amount of oncology data and to help doctors to provide some solutions, right? And I don't know if we have NYU Medical School graduate here, but don't worry, you won't lose your job because Watson is just still Watson now. But I think the fundamental question is why people need, all of us need, medical science innovation, right? And I would say if there's no innovation in life science, I would say half of the people would not be even here today. Okay, think about a century ago, early last century, right? The average life of people is about 40 years old, right? I'm sure, I think I'm eyeballing it, 2/3 of you are below that age, but many of us would not be here. It is because of the invention of antibiotics have extended the average life from 40s to 50s and 60s, right? And then thanks to the innovation in treatment of hypertension, high cholesterol, and then we extend life to 60 years old, right? But after 60 years old, what do you worry about, right? You worry about cancer, right? And thanks to the enormous innovation in the last 20, 30 years, firstly initiated by President Nixon, right? And now Obama, and then, and these are the politicians, but I'm, on the life science side, by the scientific community, we've made so much breakthroughs in the last 20, 30 years. Now, we've extended life to 70 years old, right? And in this city, actually, Hong Kong just broke the record last year, and the average female, life is about 87. 87 here.
Average.
The average, yeah. I think about it. If you walk on the street, you see some, old lady. They're over 90 years old, right? And that could be even longer. Why? Because the desire of living longer is the driving force of innovation, right? When people pass the age of 80s, they have to worry about Alzheimer's, right? And to this day, despite the fact that we're spending a lot of time trying to come up with innovation for Alzheimer's, it's still not curable, right? And then think about 10, 20 years from now, when the average life is extended to 90 years old, over 100 years, then we have to worry about some new diseases, and then we have to come up with another more innovation in life science to extend life. So that is the fundamental driving force to pushing innovation. Now, to your point, innovation is very global in medical science. And yes, US, Europe, and Japan is perhaps leading the innovation in medical science right now. But also to your point that, China, Korea, Taiwan, and India, many countries in Asia is trying to catch up. And with examples, for example, recently in the news, there's a company from Samsung called Samsung Biologics. They are they're building one of the biggest manufacturer site for making biologics. And that they're one of the top 3 manufacturers for biologics. Biological drugs. Biological drugs, yeah. And then there's another example, which is a company based of Shanghai called Wuxi Pharmatech. And this is a company that was founded by 5 returnees from China in year 2000, so about 15 years ago. Today, they have 12,000 scientists, and they actually have about 1,100 PhDs, and half of them are returnees, well-trained in the US with 20 years of experience. And this is the biggest talent pool in life science, globally. actually, if you look at the private sector, right? They have come up with lots of innovations, and just to give you a number, last year U.S. FDA designated 45 most breakthrough drugs, right? And they do it every year. Last year was 45, and this company, Wuxi Pharmatech, they were involved in developing about 34 of those. So that is 80%. The participation from this company is 80%. So they're really catching up, right? And there's examples after examples. So to support my point that innovation is global, but innovation is also regional. By that, what I mean is many diseases, they have the regional characteristics. So taking hepatitis, for example, right? We know hepatitis has hepatitis B, hepatitis C, and 10% of Asians have or carry hepatitis B virus, but that is not very prevalent in the US. In the US, in the Western world, hepatitis C is very prevalent. Obviously, many multinational companies, because they're based in the US or Europe, they're allocating more resources in hepatitis C. But then who will try to develop drugs to treat hepatitis B? These are the local companies based in China or Korea or Japan, right? And so there's innovation in that. And then there's another example that just came to my mind that there's also a disease in children, in newborn baby. It's called foot, hand, and mouth disease, which is actually lethal, right? The death rate every year, there are about hundreds of newborn died of that disease because of that virus, and that virus happened to be just prevalent in this region, in the southern Asia region, and there were a couple of Chinese companies that just came up a vaccine that cure with a cure rate of 90%. And clearly, this innovation was local because they have to, treat the local diseases, but it also benefit the world because now multinationals are trying to, license this development and try to spread it over the world, right? So.
Fantastic. Thanks so much for the great examples of what you're seeing coming from the region, and I'm sure there's so many more to come. Now, I wanted to touch upon, especially since Jonathan had mentioned urbanization, the concept of smart cities. And so increasingly, with greater urbanization, the importance of developing our cities in a direction, in a way that makes use of technology, that makes our lives more convenient, but also addresses a lot of the pain points and needs in society. Alan, you've been very involved, I think, in various smart city initiatives. Would love to hear your take on how key elements required for that, especially here in Asia, so Hong Kong in particular.
Well, I think if you look at Hong Kong in general, the future, of course, is smart cities. As everyone knows, those cities that don't innovate, that fall behind, that don't lead, will not be around. Same as companies, not just cities, but same as big behemoth companies. The hardest thing is really to change over staff, because you have a lot of staff, for especially big corporations, that don't move very, very quickly because of the size. The same with cities. Hong Kong, because we're small, 7 million people, and it's dense, we have the capacity to do it, to move quickly. The one impediment we have in Hong Kong is, I hope there's no reporters here, is the government. Because the government works very slowly in Hong Kong. What I've recommended, because if you look at China, government there is advocating, Li Keqiang is the one that's really been advocating moving quickly. Tech is what matters, tech is the future, encouraging young entrepreneurs to start out and do business. I was just talking to some government officials, Chinese government officials, who said the reason that it's moving so quickly in China is because, say, fintech, for argument's sake, Hong Kong should be leading because financial services is one of our strengths. But what's happened in China is that, originally Alibaba came up with Ant because of their big data and were able to amalgamate customers and know their habits and whatever, came up with Ant Financials and Tencent. They're all coming up with different threats to banks. And of course, the SOEs, the big banks in China, were very upset and very worried about their business. They went to the government and wanted to shut down Alibaba's business and some of the other tech companies that were coming up. And the government said, no, this is the future. And it's the first time where, I know China gets criticized a lot, but this is one case where they just said, no, we're going to let them innovate. We're going to let, because this is the future. And of course, as some of us have talked earlier and some of the speakers have said, today China has almost a cashless society. I mean, WeChat has over 860 million users today, and it's a way, I mean, I was just talking to the Vice Dean, and we want to exchange, instead of telephone numbers, do you have a WeChat code? And so it just changed the way we communicate, the way we live. And in China, nobody even calls anyone. They just send a message on WeChat just by voice message on WeChat. And so...
And just over lunch, I learned how to use the radar function on WeChat. So the whole group of us standing around the corner press radar, and we're all connected.
So it's the whole thing is just changing the way we think, the way we do. Hong Kong itself should be the smart city. We should be leading. Shenzhen, if we look at Shenzhen, as one of the speakers earlier said, he'd been recently to Shenzhen. I have. I spent a lot of time there. It is incredible what is going on there. And in Hong Kong, we are falling behind. Basically, our LegCo took 3 years to start an IT, pass funding for an IT minister, for Nicholas Yang to become the IT minister. And so these are things, my recommendation is for Hong Kong, which I can speak about, is really the first, it's got to start at the top and then filter down. It's top down and then it's bottom up. And if the government has the vision, if the government itself needs to totally innovate the IT industry into the government itself, we're still doing things in government in prehistoric times. The BD building department still does everything by hand. Many different departments are not connected. And so in today's world, you can't do it, and that's why these young people today are very frustrated. And I mean, there's a whole, other thing, the social impact that it's caused on Hong Kong. We need to be the smart city. We have the ability to create sensors just around almost in every street corner. Just thinking of how technology can help to lead, to put Hong Kong, the services in Hong Kong, it'll make our services stronger and stronger. In fintech, which were financial services, it just last month, finally, Norman Chan, the HKMA head, finally allowed 5 companies to create financial models, wallets, which in the past, now we can have Alipay and Apple Pay and some of these companies that before the banks had it, could not. So we have to totally change our thinking here. And those cities that do not become smart cities, do not lead, will not be around. And I say today, China, to me, Shenzhen is even leading Silicon Valley. If you really go to Silicon Valley and you go to Shenzhen and you see what is going on, and I'm happy to see Taiwan is really, and Taiwan always was one of the innovators actually, with Acer and all the companies that helped to build Taiwan in the past. They were the leaders, but they also fell asleep for a while. And so these are things that the other thing that I want to say is the education system is where we're falling down in Hong Kong. The education system today, the students know more than the teachers, not just in Hong Kong, but almost everywhere in the world, because technology is moving so quickly, and the teachers, the professors, did not grow up with it. And so a 2-year-old now grows up on the internet. And so they need to change. All education systems need to change so that everyone can be brought up to speed. I said I had lunch last week with the dean of the London Business School. He was here from London. I said the same thing. He agreed with me that it is a fundamental problem. It has to start with education. And as we educate, people then will be able to, the world will get better. And those cities that really take advantage of that and are first movers, they will be the winners at the end.
Thanks so much, Alan. Again, great segue over to you, Jamie. So as Alan mentioned, Taiwan has been innovative for a long time. What are the main attributes? What does one need to be more, to create an environment which is much more innovative and fosters innovation?
Well, I would have to say Taiwan was very innovative back in the 70s, 80s, and 90s because we didn't have a choice. We had our backs against the wall, and we just had to try things. Necessity, and then we just have to go out and try to get orders. We just have to try to squeeze efficiency out of our manufacturing to keep our prices low and stay competitive to our Japanese and Korean competitors. Fast forward today, I think by the 2000s, our economy has grown to a place where people are having comfortable lives, and we went through a period where smart young people only wanted to go and join TSMC and MediaTek and have good jobs instead of start their own companies. That's why we sort of fell asleep, and now we're suffering from those good days. And gradually, people are realizing there are not enough comfortable jobs for them. So now they're starting to think about if they want to start their own company. But back to the smart city thing, I think when we're thinking, so I had the pleasure of talking to a lot of government officials and mayors, and then when they think about smart cities, they're thinking about this as if it's a utility, and they just have to build it, and then the city will be smart. But then if you come to think about it, it's probably not gonna pan out that way. It's probably gonna be more of a end result of private businesses competing against each other. Take Uber, for example. Of course, having an app that can help you get taxi, and having an app that can make it so that you can drive your car as a part-time job would make the city smarter. But it was not a government that thought of the business model. It was a private company, and by the time every city has equivalent of Uber, and then once we have autonomous cars, then it's gonna be the cities are gonna be much smarter. But I would guess most of that end result would not be some sort of direct influence by a city or a government. It might have been some sort of public-private partnership, so that allow autonomous cars to be legal and the traffic lights to accommodate for them. But sort of it should be the private sector leading the charge instead of the public sector. And then I have to agree with Alan, education is really key. So John talked about having AI stealing our jobs. So if that's happening, then it's our government's responsibility to educate our next generation so that they have the skills of developing AI instead of doing the things AI is gonna take away. They have the skills of training the machines instead of doing the things and having the machines train them to do things. So I think education is really key, but except for US that's pushing for computer science for all, you don't see many Asian countries waking up to this trend and realizing if they don't implement a radical change to their education, they're gonna put their young people at a very disadvantageous position. So I think education is really, really crucial.
No, great. Thanks for that. In fact, one of my areas of interest is in fintech. So earlier on, Steve Watson was here, and my pitch to him was this: because recently IBM bought Promontory, which is an advisory for regulatory and legal, and that's my background, law. So the idea is for lawyers to train the AI so that they can then go to the next level. So I said, Steve, we need to do a Watson and a Watson, right? So if he can train the AI, then in a way, how will that AI invest in the market and futures and like? But now turning over to you, Bin. So we're talking about innovation in general here in the cities, but in terms of innovation for life sciences in Asia in particular, any thoughts and suggestions in terms of how Asian economies can innovate and create an environment to foster life sciences advances here?
Yeah, thanks for the question. When it comes to innovation in life science, and I think the key word is ecosystem, right? So when you think about, for example, taking US as a good example of medical innovation, they have a very comprehensive ecosystem to encourage the innovation. Now, by ecosystem, what I mean is you need talents, people, you need money, capital, whether it's private capital or public market, right? And then you need government policies, right? And so these are the boxes that you have to check, which will really create a comprehensive ecosystem. And when you look at the Asian countries, right, not every box is checked. If we look at country by country, region by region, some places, for example, in China, you can say, well, government does have policy to encourage the innovation, but do they have talents? Yes, they may have talents in some areas. For example, in the private companies, but when it comes to basic, fundamental research in the academic institution, in universities, they're not there. So you cannot check that box, right? And when it comes to capital, right, yes, actually, that's where I'm from, right? So we invest in public and private investment. So there's lots of private money into the medical health area. But, in the public market, that market is not there because China does not have a NASDAQ market where it allows the money-losing startup biotech companies to be listed, right? However, if you look at Korea, if you look at Taiwan, they have that, right? So, but when you use the same parameters to measure Taiwan, you'll say, well, maybe Taiwan, the government policy maybe is not that strong because they don't have much tax break. Where you look at China, almost every region will kind of have their biotech zone. They'll give you tax breaks, right? So you really have to, look at the whole ecosystem. But I would say, there's no country in the region will have perfect ecosystem. Every country probably has some defects in the ecosystem, but that doesn't stop innovation. And despite that, you see, innovations continuously coming from Korea, India, and China, and Taiwan, and the rest of the region, right? So that's the ecosystem. I think that's the key, right, for healthcare innovation.
Thanks so much, Shin, because I think that applies to all aspects of innovation. You need the private sector, you need the government support and vision, and you need, to be honest, parents who are willing for their kids to take risk, who not just want to be. I used to joke. I used to tick all the boxes, 2 of the 3 boxes. I'm a lawyer who worked in investment bank. Tick tick. You know, Chinese parents love that, right? Just not the doctor part. So my mom's not happy about that. But then increasingly, these are jobs that are being changed because of technology. So it's having parents who are willing, able to embrace that, and having opportunities for the kids to learn about that, to immerse themselves into the future of jobs that are yet to come. I want to leave this opportunity to entertain some questions. So some questions from the floor, please. If you raise your hand, and a mic over there, please.
Such an Asian thing to talk about parents.
But it's true.
Well, the hardest thing is that many parents don't understand what's coming because they're from a different generation. And that is the hardest thing, is convincing, especially in Hong Kong and China, where they think totally different than even American, the Western world. And so that's a big problem.
And I just want to share this brief anecdote before I pass it on. So again, I'm quite involved in the fintech space, and somebody was just telling me, yes, you know, they met with this young guy, very bright. He got 2 job offers, right? He just graduated from Hong Kong U, one with a fintech startup, and one in a big investment bank back office, you know, ops role. His girlfriend's mother wants him to do the big investment bank one, right? So which one did he do, right? But this is how do you encourage innovation when you have this environment? Please.
Hello, my name is Jasmine. I'm from Stern MBA class of 2013. My question is regarding like how do you participate in innovation? Earlier we were talking about the society is aging. Soon in 20 years, most people are above 65 years old. On the other hand, innovation or technology companies tend to demand a lot of time. In Shenzhen, a lot of these buildings that have these technology companies are still like lit up after 10 p.m., 11 p.m. So just a question for you yourself, as you go through your career, as you are aging, how do you still participate in innovation, stay ahead of the curve? We're not talking about like the next generation, right? On the other hand, also for your institution, in the biotech industry, you have to be aware of what's going on, all the new things coming up. And even for like Lan Kwai Fong, Alan's company already very established. People probably are very comfortable. How do you make them to stay ahead of the curve compared to all these startups who are actually fighting for their lives? So I want to hear your thoughts. Thank you.
Great. So personal question about how you yourself participate in innovation. Maybe shall we start, Alan, and we go down?
Okay. You know, the hardest thing again, I don't come from millennium generation. I come from a totally different generation. Although Joe Tsai the other day was giving a speech from Alibaba and said at the Hong Kong Jones Chamber of Commerce, and said among 600 people, he said, Alan Siemens probably the youngest old guy that I know. Yeah. And the thing is that I think for all leaders of companies, especially in Lan Kwai Fong, whatever, number one, surround yourself with the younger generation. Understand that there is a change taking place in the world that's different to what you grew up with. And there is a divide. Understand who your customer base is, because as I say, there is a divide in the world between the traditionalists and the millennials who have a totally different buying habit and different way of looking at life. And so by having a balance, you know, Chinese have the yin yang. Even in business, create the balance where you have a base and then you have the new things coming out, and be very, very open-minded, which I am. I love innovation. I love creativity. As I say, I grew up in the fashion business, and for myself, I just accept any new thing that comes, good, bad, or indifferent. I look at it, and I always look at the positive side of life. I never look at the negative side. For me, I love going through life. It's easier to go through life being positive. So everything to me is doable and can do. And so I look at things, I look at this new world. Instead of fighting it, I accept it. And I think that is the way, whether it's biomedical, whether it's whatever industry you're in, whether it's fintech, whether it's Lan Kwai Fong, whether it's property development, you have to surround yourself with people who understand that, who came out of the millennial year. And that's what I have done, and that's always been a secret to my success, is being kind of a leader in places that I should never have been. You know, now, as everybody knows, I'm very involved in politics and in political world in Hong Kong, which, again, I wasn't trained for that or whatever, but I'm still working very hard behind the scenes with all the BS that's going on in Hong Kong. But so you have to really think about tomorrow, and think about where your company's going to be, and where your future's going to be, and age doesn't matter. Age is only a number. Think young.
Fantastic. Now from the young one on the panel.
Sort of, I have to agree with everything Alan just said, and I guess from my own experience, I was sort of ahead of the curve from the get-go. So I co-founded my first company when I was 21, and then the whole time, except for going to Stern, I was an entrepreneur. So jumped to the other side of the table when I turned 31. So one of the reasons why was because I knew that by the age of 30, 35, it'll be hard for me to catch up with other younger startup founders. Take Snapchat, for example. Yes, we're in the industry, we need to get to know it. But then once I signed up, I realized I don't have friends on Snapchat. I don't have anybody who want to send me naughty pictures, even if I'm willing to try it. So it's not like I don't get Snapchat. It's like I have no chance of getting Snapchat. But then ever after I jumped to the other side of the table, I'm the younger one in the VC world. So I still work really hard. I wake up every day at 5, and I work 70 to 80 hours a week. But I don't see it as work, because this is something I'm passionate about. So I don't feel like I'm working. I feel like I'm doing something I truly enjoy. So maybe that's another advice to you. Don't think about participating in innovation. Think about is there something that you absolutely want to see happen but not happening, and devote your life into making it happen. But then I'm also planning, maybe I'll only get to do this for another 6 to 10 years until a younger VC who is much more, works much harder and knows much more than I do, and maybe there's a new Snapchat of VC that I won't have friends on, and then I'll get disrupted. So I plan to save a lot of money in the next 5 to 10 years, and then if I get disrupted, I'll just retire. But then it's fun to do.
I think you'll end up like Alan, right? You can't retire if you have that mindset. There's
Maybe
no such thing.
I'll be the youngest retired guy, and then I'll disrupt all the other retirees, maybe. So just always stay ahead of my curve. But then I guess my advice would be do something you're passionate about, and then you won't feel that it's a work, and then you'll end up innovating because you're passionate about it.
So from my personal experience, because I was a scientist myself, involved in developing drugs at the company called Merck in New Jersey, and but after a few years, I realized I was not the best innovator, and there was someone much smarter than I am. So now I'm switching on the other side and trying to help them, and trying to understand. I think I've better appreciation of the hard work they're putting in, and so we become a more compassionate investor to encourage the innovation in life science. And I think being innovator or investor of innovation, you really have to, you really need to take risks, okay? Because innovation is not always about success. For developing drugs, it takes a long time. It's 1 out of 1,000 chance that the drug will eventually make it to the market, will be successful. And also, not just about taking risk, it's also about how to understand the risk, how to have a calculated risk, and that's what we do as an investor. But also, I think innovation, that the process is very, very long, right? It takes 10 years to develop a drug, and we really need to give them time, give them patience, allow them to make mistakes. And in the end, innovation could be very, very rewarding, right? So we've recently invested a company based in Boston, just announced their oncology drug for the treatment of late-stage ovarian cancer, and the clinical result is fantastic. It, if a patient is taking that drug, it can extend their life by 22 months. Okay, that is already, by the way, it's a breakthrough, and it's very rewarding because we know that we're involved in innovation that could, benefit the society, benefit women, right? So.
Thank you. So just briefly on myself, so I was in big law and then big bank, and now I'm in startup land. But I think, and one of our initiatives is in young maker education. So I'd share two aspects in terms of your question. So the first is have a sense of perspective. I think as you've heard from each of them, in terms of the personal journey, each of the great guests here started with a particular perspective of what was important and what needed to be addressed, and how structurally what they do can actually improve people's lives. That's one aspect. But the other aspect is a sense of play. With making, as with entrepreneurship, it's about prototyping and then iterating. And I think it was said well earlier on, you know you will fail. As long as you learn, you know that failing is part of the process, because you're learning, you're learning along the way. And so therefore, but as long as you're having fun and you understand that's part of the process, that's how you thrive in that system. We have time for just one more question. One more question over there on that side. Thank you.
This is just something that came to my mind. How do you think the low cost of capital is affecting the innovation environment?
Oh, interesting. The low cost of capital. So in theory, it's going to be cheaper. Did you want to take that out?
I mean, of course, but we've been living with the low cost of capital actually for unprecedented time in my life. I mean, these last number of years with the low cost of capital, it's actually helped in one way, but it's caused a great divide in the world socially between the haves and the have-nots, and that's why you have the problems all over the world, because the rich got richer in this environment, and the poor, unfortunately, property prices have gone up, all commodity prices have gone up, and the ones that have money, and that's caused this social division between society, not just in Hong Kong, but everywhere. I believe that, of course, when capital is low, you take chance. Companies, corporations can take chances, can take greater chances. There's much more money in the system in order to innovate, in order to do things. It enables you to take chances. Just getting back to what you had said about failure, I always say failure is good, because if you don't fail, it means you never tried anything. And at least don't be afraid to take a chance. Just go out and do it. Nike has a saying, just do it. I always say follow Nike. Just do it. Don't think. If you think too much, you're not going to do it. And so having, of course, the low cost of capital, I was around when, interest rates were under Paul Volcker's years of 19 and 20% and 22%, and it was not much fun. A lot of innovation didn't happen at that time. You're just trying to preserve or keep money in the bank because you got high interest rates. But, this gives you the ability to really change and do things. And as technology gets more and more innovative, you will find newer things, easier things, more perfect things, more information around, and it'll move the world much quicker than we ever did. Social media today is moving the world in directions that we never dreamed of. In the old days, when you wanted to do something, you told your friend told his friend or her friend, and so on, and that's how information got passed around. Even in medicine, I sit on the board of the sanatorium hospital in Hong Kong, and so the advances that are happening almost every day in medicine is incredible. And even here in Hong Kong, we have some great hospitals, and so having low cost of capital really does help, and really will help to advance the world in the innovative way, but will unfortunately create the divisions of society which happen today. And that's why you might have Donald Trump as president in the United States.
Anybody else want to touch on that?
I'll just add a little bit to what Alan has said. So I think if given a choice, nobody or no company would want to innovate, because if you can just do the same thing you do and make more money, then who would want to innovate? So the only reason why companies innovate is because of competition. And pumping more money into the system reduces barrier to entry and then creates more competition. That's why it results in more innovation. And if you look at China over the past 5 years, 5 years ago, when you talk about the internet companies of China, they're still saying they're just copying whatever US has to China. But then fast forward 5 years, it's Facebook that's copying WeChat. And the only reason why WeChat, given its dominance, still has been willing to innovate this quickly is because it's fear of sort of the new entrants that's going to catch up. So yes, pumping money into the system will create competition, which will result in innovations.
I just want to add a little bit to that, and I agree with everything else too. But what's actually also happening because of the low rates is bubbles, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on which side you look at it. So for the entrepreneurs, especially in fintech, wow, there are lots of unicorns coming about, so everybody's rushing into it. But it also means that there's some of various quality. But that's what innovation is about. You have lots of different types of companies trying to compete for it, and some work and some don't, but there is a bit of bubble.
Bubbles are actually good for redistribution of wealth. It's the rich investors are paying for the tuition of the failed entrepreneurs. So I'm actually for bubbles.
Spoken like a true entrepreneur.
Yeah,
right?
it makes the societies more even.
But bubbles were around even in the years of the tulips,
True,
So I mean, bubbles have been around forever. Before IT, and it'll be around forever. So.
So just on the same point, low cost in the medical science innovation is actually a good thing, because if you look at the cost of innovation in the US and the Western world, it's extremely high. And we've done some calculation, on if you spend $1 on you would probably generate $2 to $3 of commercial, sort of revenue, right? But in this region, because of the cost of labor, because of the cost of doing research is lower, including a regulatory hurdle is lower, clinical trial size is smaller, so the return of investing in R&D is much, much higher at this stage. And US had this before, but that was like 3 decades ago, right? But unfortunately, the cost of developing novel technologies in life science in the US is now is very high now. So it is actually optimal time to invest in R&D by leveraging low-cost capital right now in this region. Okay.
Fantastic. So will you all please put your hands together to thank this wonderful panel here. And I kind of, we joked about it just before coming up. We said we're the no-tie panel because we're the innovation entrepreneurial panel. So the last thing I wanted to do is very millennial. So let's take a selfie here against the NYU sign, right? There we go. Hold on. Thank you. I'll Snapchat her to him. I need to open an account now.
Many thanks to our group of wonderful panelists. Obviously, moderator Brian Tan for doing a great job. Before we come to our last talk of the day, we will have a 5-minute quick break, so you can go back and to get a cup of coffee and quickly come back. We will reconvene roughly about 4:10. We will hear from NYU Shanghai Vice Chancellor Jeff Lehman to talk about how education can position the institution for the changing future. Thank you. Only 5 minutes. Quickly come back. Thank you.